Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tablas Creek Instagram Live conversation. I am your host, Proprietor Jason Haas. My guest this week is, I think, one of the most interesting and distinctive and clear-eyed voices in international wine. It's Robert Joseph, who is a writer, consultant, editor, author, winery owner, brand builder, just an absolutely fascinating guy who I have known via my experiences with him on Twitter back a decade, and who I think is as perceptive and thoughtful about the moment that we are in as anyone who I know. So I can't wait for you to meet him, but as I always do, while I'm waiting for everyone to join, I thought I'd share a few pictures as to what's going on here at the winery. So it is just absolutely gorgeous. This is a picture I took on a walk out to the vineyard this morning, just to give you a sense of the sky. It's about, 75 degrees out right now. This is the most moderate and beautiful summer that we have ever had. It reminds us very much of 2023. So far, conditions have been terrific, and we just hope they keep up. We are just barely getting to the point where we are starting to see a little bit of veraison. This is the most veraised cluster that I could find in the vineyard. This is a Mourvèdre block. So it's a Mourvèdre cluster up at the top of the hill. Most of the vineyard does not look like this. I'll show you a picture of Grenache, which is really what most of the vineyard looks like. Still green, pretty much full-sized berries. We do expect to see veraison coming throughout the vineyard in the next couple of weeks. That is normal. We're maybe a week or two behind average, but what we've seen is perfect ripening conditions, so we expect things to catch up. We are trying to get out there and do some sampling. I've got a picture of the sampling at work in the cellar, where we're sampling every few vines, trying to get a cluster, trying to get cluster weights as well as counts, just to know what we have coming up. We are also working to blend our 2024 reds. We made the blending decisions on a month or two ago, but as we've been bottling, we've freed up space in some of our larger barrels and tanks to put the wines together. So we've putting Mourvèdre together this morning, and I've got a fun picture for me because we've got my younger son Seb, who is here spending a month learning the ropes in the vineyard and winery. So that's him actually attaching a hose for the blending today. And then finally, one last thing that I think is incredibly exciting. We are the subject of a featured article on Vinous Media. The writer Eric Guido came through a couple months ago and did a tasting that spanned 23 vintages of our Esprit de Tablas. It's an absolutely lovely article. I hope that you subscribe to Vinous. It is an incredible resource. We are going to be sharing more of this over social media in coming days. So anyway, it was a lovely article. Thank you, Eric. And I encourage you to read it. So, okay, that's it. I'm going to stop sharing. I am going to accept Robert's invitation. I just saw that come through, and I can't wait for you to spend some time with him. Okay. The request, and hopefully this all works as smoothly as it did during our test. He's joining from the UK, so marvelous.
Hi, Jason.
How are you, Robert?
I'm very good, and I'm feeling very jealous because I'm grounded in the UK at the moment. And I would love to be looking at the grapes both in Minervois in France, where I make wine, and also I'm involved in making wine, and also in Georgia. But I'm grounded in the UK, so I can't be doing that right now.
What have your growing conditions been like so far in those places?
We've had some mixed times. Basically in France we've had hot, and then we've had rain. Nothing. I think the thing that we've all learned about, this is something that Ernie Lucen said to me a long time ago in Germany. Back in the days when we weren't really talking about climate change as much as we are today, he said, when I was a kid, my mother, my grandmother, they had these rules. That, if it's raining on the 15th of July or whatever, this is what tends to happen. And he said, it didn't always work. I lived in Burgundy for 5 or 6 years. Those rules were not too bad. And as Ernie said, now there are no rules. You have no idea. So suddenly it's like having a map or finding your sat nav, and you find your sat nav doesn't work anymore. The sat nav says turn left, and the road isn't there. And that's exactly the way I think it feels being a grape grower. And then at the same time, we've got all the other stuff that we don't know about in terms of politics and wars and tariffs and so on. And we don't know what's coming there either. So I think anyone who's in our business is literally flying blind. And I think that's not necessarily fun.
Yeah, no, I can certainly empathize with big pieces of that. But we're sort of jumping in the middle. I would love to start. I always ask my guests to start by telling a little bit about their journey into wine. How did that happen for you?
Well, I have this story about being kidnapped by Albanian gypsy winemakers as a kid, but I've never been able to get anyone to believe it, so I'll give it. My parents actually accidentally, it's almost as strange, they accidentally ended up owning a hotel in the south of England.
Okay.
Essentially, they bought this building, which they were going to turn into apartments for people working at Gatwick Airport, and they didn't have enough money, and they got partners in, and suddenly it was a luxury hotel with chefs and maitre d's and all that stuff. And then the partners then dropped out, and my parents ended up running this thing, and I grew up there as an only kid, and I was pretty bad. I got bored in the kitchen, cooking the same thing, or trying to do the same thing every day. I wasn't a great barman because I kept getting whether it was 6 whiskeys and 4 gins or vice versa. And ultimately, the wine list and that became interesting to me, and particularly because as an only kid, I was collecting stamps, and I looked at all these labels, and to me, wine labels were like stamps. There were stories behind them. And there was a maitre d' in those days. We didn't have a sommelier, we had a maitre d', and he introduced me to wine. And he was very passionate about it, and I got to taste all these leftover wines that people had had. My parents were not that into wine. And so I then did a stage in Champagne, aged about 15, and then I then ended up buying wine for the hotel age 20. Instead of going to university, I ended up having really got into wine. The first Hugh Johnson book was my guide. And then I went to live in Burgundy for what I thought was 6 months, and that turned into being 5 or 6 years. And
How did your parents feel about the choice to go to Burgundy rather than to university?
My parents were pretty indulgent. I mean, they didn't spoil me in any way, but basically, I mean, my parents were non-practicing Jews, but they kind of said, you probably ought to get to Oxford. And I said, I don't want to. And they said, fair enough. So, so basically, it gives you an idea. No. And so Burgundy was fascinating, and that was in the early days. And when I was in Burgundy, I lucked out because I ended up working for a lady called Becky Wasserman, who is a legendary character, was a legendary character. And she was one of the first brokers of sending wine into the US, particularly. And so, this is the early 1980s, and I would, in a day, I would be showing around her customers, and I did a bit of scouting for her. But I'd be going to Comte Lafon in the morning, and I'd be going to Rousseau in the afternoon, and Brevo later in the day. And my one of my memories from them was a Chicago customer of Becky's. And we'd just gone to see Lafon in the morning, had a good tasting, and we were going to go see Michel Buisson. And we had something else, and he said, can we skip the next one? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, we're running late anyway, and I've never heard of this guy. And we were parked up in front of the house, a modern house in Merceau. He said, I've never heard of this guy. Can we let's go to lunch? And I said, being polite as I could, I said, well, we can't. We've got an appointment, and he's giving us the time. Why are we going here anyway? I said, well, Becky and I think he's good. And in we go, and we're given an aligoté, and we're given some Bourgogne Blanc. And I could see by a tall guy who reminded me, I have to say, of Anthony Perkins from Psycho. Didn't say any words, really. And my Chicago guy was not really, he liked the wines, but why are we here? That was Kosh Durdy.
Right.
So I have no idea whether he bought me wine that day or not, but he had bought the wine in that year, which probably was 82 or something. How much would that be worth? today. Then I came back, I was asked to start a magazine, helped start a magazine, started Wine International magazine, or what became Wine International magazine, started to write for
Right,
some of
but
the
actually, hold on.
Italian.
I want to slow you. I want to slow you
Yeah.
down there. It's a big leap from like loving wine and even buying wine to writing about wine. How did you get
It,
asked to start that magazine, and
it's
why
the
do
other
you
way
think you would be
around.
good at it?
It's the other way around. I wanted to be a writer.
Okay.
And so, I might have been writing about something else, and maybe I'd make more money if I'd done that. When I was living in Burgundy, I was fascinated with Burgundy. I thought I'd write the book on Burgundy because there wasn't one. And then this wretched man called Anthony Hansen wrote my book. They wrote a very good book, and there was no point in me writing a book. But I was already writing articles for a magazine in London called Wine and Spirit, which was a trade magazine, which was edited by someone. I don't know what happened to her. I don't know what happened. Called Jancis something. Jancis Robinson's first job. Well, first she was a courier before that. So her first job was actually as an editorial assistant, I think, on Wine and Spirit, and then the editor left to start Decanter, and she was sort of moved across into the editor's chair. And I called her one day from Burgundy to ask for a copy of the magazine for something I wanted to read about, and she said, "Do you want to write for us?" So that was really what started it. And then because I was already writing for them, somebody else said, "Hey, do something for us," and then that turned into Wine Magazine. So that was the early days, and then newspapers, quite a number of books, strange books, various things, and all of that. And then the International Wine Challenge started in 1984, which was a kooky idea where we just thought we would taste some English wines. In those days, nobody was talking about English wines, and by the way, they didn't have bubbles then. English wines against other white wines from other countries. And we bought the other white wines. And there was a Chablis and various things. It was a pretty ragtag collection, I have to say. But we did it properly. We did a blind tasting. We had as many people with foreign names in London you could get. You could afford the cab fare, but basically we didn't spend any money on this. And then in those days, before calculators, then we had sort of hand calculator thing. And what I can tell you is English wines did really well. And we had to check the numbers every 3 times. And so we published this thing, and I was going to call it sort of England versus the world or something like that. And my publisher said, "Look, you got to give it a good name." And I think he came up with the name International Wine Challenge, which is a very pretentious name for a tasting of 50 wines. And then we got calls from lots of generic organizations and others who explained to me how the Olympics works. And they said, the basic thing is you don't get to choose the other teams. The French choose who represent France. And so suddenly we were running a competition. And it went from 50 to like 100, 200. It doubled every year for quite a while. Then, thank goodness, it stopped doubling, but it got up to about 10,000. It was the biggest competition in the world. And
were there other international competitions like that going at the time, or was this the first?
There was something called the IWSC, which was not nearly. It did spirits and wine, but it really was very New World focused in those days, and so not really. Decanter came along after us, and then after we were running that for I think like 10, 15 years, I took it to Asia and did it in Hong Kong, China, Japan, Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore, Russia, India, you name it. Right. So I was running 1 year, I think I did 5 competitions. Just mad. But it was fascinating. I learned a lot and enjoyed it. And then all of that came to a halt in 2005, exactly 20 years ago, because 2 things happened. One was the competition and the magazine, which I stopped. I'd only edited the magazine for a short while, but I was involved, had a column in it, involved with it. But the magazine and the competition was sold, and my son was born. There's no connection between these 2 events. But there was a point at which I realized that my son would need feeding and clothing. And wine writing didn't look like a particularly good way to do that. And so I had a redundancy deal that was on offer, and I thought, yeah, I'll take that. And let's go and make wine. So the right thing you do is you go and buy a nice.
You ignored the classic adage that the best way to make a small fortune in the wine industry is to start with a large fortune.
Not exactly, Jason, because I didn't have any money, so I didn't have the big fortune to start with, and so I couldn't buy a nice vineyard. I couldn't buy any kind of vineyard, to be honest. And the thing also was I was very aware, because of the competition, I was very aware of the success of branded wines from the US, from Australia and Chile. So, the Mondavis and the Hardys and the Conchitoros and so on. And we didn't see any of that. And my heart was still very much in France.
Right.
I've been to Australia, so my heart was partly in Australia, I have to say, and a little bit in California, but my heart's still France, Burgundy, etc. But I was very aware we didn't have European brands like you have brands in California and so on. And I thought, why can't we? Why shouldn't we have a varietal brand from France like you have from other places? So I got together with two other people, two far cleverer than me in their respective ways. A guy called Hugh Ryman, who'd been one of the first flying winemakers, who'd made wine in 17 countries, I think.
Yeah,
And one of your neighbors in Sonoma, a guy called Kevin Shaw, whose agency, Stranger and Stranger, is one of the top design agencies, but he was in London in those days. And we are three very different people. If we were a band, we would definitely be the three. We get on really well, but we're very different human beings. And we came together, and one of the first ideas was to make a non-vintage, and I still would love to do this, a non-vintage Bordeaux. Because I feel that, I shouldn't say this, sorry guys, Mouton and Cadet is not what it should be. Is not as good a wine as it should be. There should be a Moet and Chandon of Bordeaux. Right? A reliable, not great, but you know what you're going to get, non-vintage, reliable, easy Bordeaux product. And I thought we could do that. And we couldn't. Two reasons. One was the Bordelais were a nightmare to deal with. And secondly, when I went to talk to potential customers, they said, look, you don't understand. The people who want to buy Bordeaux don't want to buy a branded wine, and the people who want to buy a branded wine don't want to buy Bordeaux. And everybody wants to buy Bordeaux in Britain and probably the States. It's probably 80 years old. And we're not talking about top-end Bordeaux, but daily drinking Bordeaux. So that went by the side, but we then found these wonderful people in Minervois. And they needed us, we needed them. They had 6,000 hectares of land, they had lots of varietals. And it was like what I experienced in Australia 20 years earlier, where when you turn up with your glass, they'd give you a glass, and they'd look in your eyes and say, too oaky, or a little bit of this, and then they'd run away and come back. And so we got into blending and making interesting blends. And the vineyards there go from 50 meters above the sea up to 300, up in La Lavinière, which is a wonderful country. And so we started making these, what I call vin de terroir. So not vin de terroir, but each wine is a blend of 3, 4, 5 different vineyards, different soils, different winds. And the key to that was what I wanted to do, and I'm totally shameless in saying this. I wanted to make wine that actually, A, tasted more or less the same every year, like those New World wines did, and B, was scalable, so that we could actually make enough of it. And basically, I wasn't going to own any land on this. We just wanted to create something that people would want to drink. And we started with the States, was our first market. Initially, we called it Le Mouton Noir, black sheep. Why? Because everybody said we'd go bust. We were doing a Cabernet Syrah blend. We were doing a Chardonnay Viognier blend. And in France, we do not do this. It's not in this area. It is not traditional. You would go best. So we were like the black sheep going that way, and the white sheep were all going the other way. Then we got a letter from a chateau in Bordeaux that said you can't have Mouton on the label. And we became Le Grand Noir. So it's a big sheep. So everything has come from that.
And so you were channeling Led Zeppelin in your naming, kind of.
Yes, I mean it was
challenge.
Yes.
The market.
Yeah, I mean, not Black Sabbath, which was our other. We could have gone down that route, I think, and raise a glass to the late great. And now we are immodestly the 11th biggest French brand in the US, which compared to any US brand, we're tiny. Even the best-selling French brands in the US are not that big, as you know. But we're a brand and we're in 60 countries, so it's been quite a ride.
So it seems like a great success. So you were clearly onto something, and now this is what 20 years later.
20 years exactly. Yeah.
How has the vision for Le Grand Noir evolved from where you started?
Well, we started with two different. The thing that was different about Le Grand Noir, and again, unashamedly, we because we've got this group of cooperatives we're working with all these different vineyards, we have been customer centric from day one. So we have now importers in lots of different countries. We don't make wine, we don't bottle wine unless we have an importer who wants it.
Ah,
So we are never sitting on stock. I mean, yeah, we're sitting on stock. We're not sitting on bottled stock. So basically, our US importer, who have quietly become the fourth biggest in America because of everybody eating each other, they say, right, we're going to take this. No one country takes more than 5 or 6 wines, but I think I have 15 different wines now. I am currently drinking in front of me. This is our 0-0. I never thought we'd be doing this. It's a zero alcoholic, and the relevance of that is I'm not allowed to be drinking alcohol at the moment. So actually, I'm quite happy to have an AF. Is it as good as the full alcohol wine? Of course not. Is it better than Coca-Cola? Yes, sure as hell it is. Is it as good as some sparkling teas and other things I've tasted? I don't know. But, these are all wine isn't competing with those when people want to drink wine.
yep.
But there are a lot of times where people, for whatever reason, aren't drinking wine, and then there's all these other drinks.
So, as if that were not a complicated enough life, more recently you have gotten involved in co-founding a wine project in the country of Georgia. Can
Very
you
true.
talk about that?
Yes, I mean, I'll put another thing because there is one other strand, which is writing. Because since 2020, I've had 2005, 20 years. I've had a column in which I've been writing for the wine industry about the wine industry, and it's called The Devil's Advocate. And the whole point of it is to get people to look at the wine industry differently because we take a lot of things for granted. One of the reasons that I've been following you for a long time is you and I on separate tracks have been thinking a lot of the same thoughts. Why not kegs? Why not premium wine in bag and box? Why all sorts of things that you've been doing, and I'm looking at other ideas like why do we have to have 75 centiliter bottles? Why not 50 centiliter bottles? And among the things, vintage, my French model. Our wines in France are vintage, but we do our very best to be as regular as we can. And in Georgia, I found this wonderful winemaker there, Vladimir K'Avshiri. And I was fascinated in Georgia. I've been doing consultancy there for a number of years. And we said, right, could we make a really great wine in Georgia? And what would we have to do that? And, obvious thing is, get a nice vineyard, get Saperavi, put it in a K'Avshiri. No, let's think broadly. We spent about nearly 5 years of testing. Started with the white, and we are breaking all of the rules. And the reason I mentioned the writing is that this is kind of the stuff I've been putting on paper in a bottle. So I've been saying, the whole thing of the vineyard is king and terroir. I've already looked at it in France and finding that actually blending from different terroirs is interesting. Champagne has done it for a long time. So let's do something. So we've got wines coming from different parts of Georgia. Châteauneuf-du-Pape has lots of different grapes. Other places don't seem to want to do that. But we have 11 different grapes, all Georgian except for 2, and the 2 in the white. One is Muscat, which gives us a little bit of aromatics. The other is Aligoté. Why Aligoté, for goodness sake? I lived in Burgundy. I have no love for Aligoté historically. I'm sorry, La Louise, Leroy. Yours is wonderful, etc. But, sorry. But Vladimir, when we're actually blending, he said, can we try and put a little bit of Aligoté in here? Why? Okay, let's try it. And it brought the other grapes together. So, and then in terms of the winemaking techniques, 11% went into K'Avshiri. Then we had another 4 or 5% that was actually skin fermented in stainless steel. We had some barrel fermented and some stainless steel fermented. And then we had a blend of vintages. So I think we've done sort of as many of those things that you wouldn't normally do. And when we did the red, we went one stage further, which I'm really pleased that we did. And you've got links with the Rhone, so I think you would understand this. We co-ferment the Saperavi with 2 white grapes. And why would you do that? Well, why not? If you can do it in Côte Rôtie, they used to do it in Rioja. They used to do it in Chianti for lots of different reasons. I find Saperavi, and lots of people have fallen in love with Georgia, and Saperavi is a wonderful grape. I don't know. I think we're going to see better and better Saperavi, better clones, better places, and so on. I find it quite often quite rustic. And co-fermenting it, 90-10 with the white grapes, gives us some finesse that we wouldn't otherwise have. So this is a fun project, and now we've got a rosé, and the rosé is the only one that isn't multi-vintage. But again, lots of different techniques going on, including drying, part air drying some grapes, one of the grapes there. And I'm loving this project. I love the French project as well, but this is so new in such an ancient place.
And you call it K'Avshiri, is that right?
It's called K'Avshiri, which means come together.
Perfect.
And it is. And so there's the cool 40-year-old Georgian guy who's doing his diploma at the moment and will go on to do Master of Wine, the fat old English former wine critic. So that coming together, and then coming together of regions, grapes, techniques, and vintages. So all of that, and then we also tie in with the fact that wine is all about coming together. Wine is, and that brings me back to the 50 centiliter bottle, by the way, which it's quite a nice size for 2 people. Yeah, I can get through half a 75 centiliter bottle. We all can, but actually 50 these days. Yeah, why not?
I agree. We did a Petit Manseng that we thought was sort of off dry. We did this for a number of years, and 750 mils was just too much of it. 375 wasn't quite enough, so we bottled that in 500 ml bottles for years. It is a very okay. So meanwhile, while you're doing these winemaking projects in different parts of Europe, you were maintaining your writing and editing. I mean, most notably, at least from my perspective, as an editor for nearly 2 decades at Meininger's International.
I should be clear on this, but there's always been an editor. And so there was a guy called Joel Payne, who was American originally, followed by a wonderful woman called Felicity Carter, who's Australian, and then more recently, a German lady called Anja Zimmer. So I've always been an editor-at-large or associate editor. I've been very involved in a lot of the copy and so on, but I've never been the editor, apart from a short time that I stood in doing that job. But it's been very, very interesting. And I have some pretty clear ideas on wine communication, which won't endear me to some people.
So, I mean, it made news just last month when Meininger's ended its publication after that 20-year run. I'm wondering if you would talk a little bit about kind of the arc, particularly as we've gotten close to modern times, and what you feel like that says about what people want to learn about wine and how.
Okay. Firstly, in my experience of Wine International magazine, which also doesn't exist anymore. So I've actually closed 2 magazines. I haven't. I've started and closed 2 magazines, and in both cases, it was around 20 years by coincidence. It's very hard publishing about wine. And there are 2 reasons, which are not, well, I don't know if they're not too disconnected. One is, most people are not as interested in wine as wine people think they are. And, wine television hasn't really worked. Wine movies haven't really worked. Although there was Sideways. Sideways was not a wine movie. It was a buddy movie. It's a road movie. It wasn't a wine movie. And so that's one side. And then advertising. The wine industry doesn't make enough money to pay for the sort of advertising that magazines need. So the Wine Spectator is a glorious, and The Enthusiast are glorious exceptions to the rule, but they're kind of lifestyle magazines. And they do that incredibly well. And they're very US focused, and that works. But there haven't been many successful magazines in the world that have really survived. Decanter, it's got its competition, it's got its website, and so on. And we were trying to be a trade magazine published by a German publisher in English. And all of that was pretty tricky. And I'm very grateful for them for hanging on in there for as long as they did, but pretty tough. And I really understand why at some point or other it became, the too hard basket is there for a reason.
Right. So,
I mean, I still write, I write every week. I've still got I do 2 columns a week, one on Substack, one through a LinkedIn newsletter. And I do those for consultancy, and that's in a sense, it's my marketing. People, anybody who wants to employ me kind of knows what they're going to get before we have a conversation. That means not many people want to employ me. But
you don't need people to employ you. You just need like 4.
The few people who do are kind of, we've done the dating bit, or we haven't even done the dating. They've seen it, they've read it, and they know roughly where I'm coming from. And I enjoy that, but it's a great pity that Meininger doesn't exist. I don't think anybody else is going to replace it. And the thing that I would say that I miss about Meininger that I was glad that we did for 20 years, we tried to look at wine, as we said at the time, as if we were based on the moon. In other words, not through an American, a British, a German perspective. And my problem is when I'm talking about wine to Americans, they start talking about the 3-tier system. They start talking about, Gallo and Constellation. And, I was talking to a very well-known US wine writer, and he started talking about big wine. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, I think it's Gallo Constellation. And I said, what about the cooperatives in Europe? Oh, that's different. Well, half the wine in Europe is made by cooperatives, some of them little, some of them big. But, they're not as commercial as Gallo and Constellation. But their role in the market it is huge. But we don't have grape growers in Europe. Well, Champagne we do, but in the same way as you do in California and Australia. So what we tried to do was to say, could we write about Poland, or could we write about California, or could we write about wherever, without saying, how is this going to fit in the New York market or the London market or whatever. And I don't think we always got that right. It was very hard getting good writers. But essentially, that was what we were trying to do, and when we got it right, when we came close to it.
So, on sort of a related vein, I believe I've heard you describe yourself as an ex-critic.
I am a recovering critic.
Even better. So, I'm wondering, what are your thoughts about the place and state of wine criticism right now?
It's a disaster. I think when I say it's a disaster, it's in an evolutionary phase. So, well, the first thing is let's get the real dirty linen out right now. We now have influencers who are paid one way or the other to write about wines, and that really upsets the traditional critics like me, who were impartial and basically were not swayed by anything, if you like. Except that we, and I'll say that the Spectator doesn't accept free trips and free meals. Most publishers do, to one extent or another. But, we're friends. It's very hard as a wine writer not to be influenced by the people you like. And to me, there's something actually quite clean about the influences. You know where they're coming from. Where when you were reading some of the people talking about Bordeaux in the old days, they were talking about the people they knew and liked. And the wine wasn't up to it this year, but we're not going to mention that too much. And so I have to say that when it comes to wine writers, Primox Burgundy, nobody talked about it for a long time. People were buying spoiled, expensive white Burgundy that was oxidized 2 years, 3 years after it was released for lots of different reasons. Some of it was use of sulfur, some of it, or lack of use of sulfur, some of it was corks, various reasons. But there was a lot of really bad wine. And a French critic, whom I will not name, said, well, I don't buy it anymore. I said, have you told people I've written about it? No. It was the wine berserkers who rang the alarm bell. And when it came to Rudy Kurniawan, it was the wine berserkers who rang the bell. And when it's come to a lot of other wine writing, I have to say, it's actually been book writers who are not necessarily traditional wine writers, Cork Dork and all these sort of things. A lot of them have come from people from the outside of the wine writing fraternity. That's number one. Number two, an awful lot of wine writers, I'm going to upset a lot of people here, are writing about wine because they love wine. And they love wine people and so on. And I was, we had people, we were paying them, I don't know, we weren't paying them a huge amount of money. We were paying $200, $300, $400, $500 to write a piece. And it came in and it looked like advertorial. It was, lovely George in his lovely vineyard makes lovely wine. And if this isn't journalism, you're not asking the questions. And my friend Felicity Carter does this wonderful. She did a talk at a conference, which I loved. And she said, I'm going to talk about stories. She's going to take the worst book in the world in those days. May still be, I don't know. 50 Shades of Grey. It's a crap book, but it's got an arc. You meet somebody, bad things happen to them, good things happen to them, more bad things. What's going to happen? You follow it. The average wine piece is John inherited, bought, whatever, a vineyard. He made nice wine. He's made more nice wine. His wife makes nice food. End of story. And you go, hold on. Did nothing bad ever happen? Did you never have arguments with your neighbors? Did you never have an arguments with your wife over the amount of your passion? Let's have the real story, not because I've got kids, 18 and 20 now, because it's recent enough that I was by their bed reading them stories. A kid wouldn't put up with the sort of crap stories we tell about wine.
You clearly didn't have to read Goodnight Moon 340 times.
We had to do so. And the Hungry Caterpillar and so on. But, you get the idea. The stories they like are the stories with some jeopardy, with something, what's going to happen now? What's next? Yeah. And so I find wine writing, I don't read as much wine writing as and I've judged wine writing competitions and I've edited lots of it and so on. And I have to say, when it's good, it's wonderful. You read someone like Andrew Jefford, you read someone like Tim Atkin, you read Jancis. There's a lot of good writers out there. Those three happen to be British, but a lot of other people. Alda's very good. Blake Gray's good from your side. He's a journalist, definitely. But, basically, I want to read people who are actually really interested in the who, what, when, where, why. So what I'm itching to do in this conversation is, hey, Jason, so you stopped those 50 centiliter bottles. Why? That's the thing that as a journalist I should be doing. And you should be, not you, but if the Robert Joseph interviewing, I mean, in this instance, but in another sense, somebody could be saying, but Robert, so the things you're doing in Georgia, why aren't you doing them in France? And I can't do the same things in France for all sorts of cultural and other reasons and so on. But that, to me, is what wine writing should be about. And
I want to give a shout out to Esther Mobley and her team at the San Francisco Chronicle.
Esther's brilliant. There are a lot of people there are a lot of good wine writers, but there's a lot more bad wine writing than there are wine writers. And
to answer your question very quickly, we stopped bottling the Petit Manseng in 500 milliliter bottles because we stopped making Petit Manseng. We decided that this was the place to do it.
Why did you stop Petit Manseng?
And that was because this is a grape which maintains crazy levels of acidity as it grows sugar late in the growing season. And Paso Robles is a place which naturally gets you good sugar and good acids anyway, and this is not a grape that you need to be growing in this place. It was
I understand that entirely. Now we, on the other hand, are growing Viognier in Minervois, which is one of the places where God intended Viognier to be made, and we struggle to sell it. So if we were the sort of corporation that we're not, the bean counters by now would have said, look, just for goodness sake, just plant something else there. But it makes delicious wine. We blend it with the Chardonnay, and it's lovely. But people struggle to say Viognier. It's not a style and a flavor that people are used to. And I'm now extrapolate that to Georgia, and I got all these words. Georgia, isn't it wonderful? There's wonderful grapes. Sorry, I'm gonna struggle to sell something called Rakatsatelli or Mtsvane in almost anywhere. Right. You've got this tiny niche of people, the 5 or 10%, and they may be the people watching us now, who are really excited to taste grapes made from grapes you can't pronounce or whatever. But they're the small number. And what I always remember is Sicily, Planeta, who I have a lot of time for as a company. They came out with their Chardonnay and their Bordeaux, their Bordeaux blend, red blend. And a lot of people went, oh, no, Italy, we don't want these international varieties and so on and so forth. They actually seduced people with, especially in the US, with those international varieties. And now you go and look at what Planeta's doing, and they're doing Cerasuolo, they're doing lots of wine stuff in Etna and so on. But right. They won the trust of people with the grapes that people understood and knew.
Okay, I have like 8 more questions I wanted to ask you, but I also am committed to keeping this to a reasonable length. So yep. I'm going to ask one more real question, and then the question of essentially how do people learn more. But the real question I have is, like, this is a difficult moment for wine for lots of reasons. There's demographics.
That could be the understatement of the day.
Anti-alcohol movement. There's lots of things going on. There's tariffs. There's international trade issues. Yeah. So I'm curious, like, who do you see reacting best in this moment? Like, what do you see as sort of successful initiatives and reaction in a moment where a lot of people are struggling?
You're making this very hard for me because I have to talk about a brand and a company that you're not entirely disassociated with. I think that what the Perrins are doing in France, what they've done with La Vieille Ferme is brilliant. And there's a thing that's fascinating about La Vieille Ferme, which a lot of people don't know about, which is that if you buy La Vieille Ferme in France, it's got an appellation, or a set of different appellations. And if you buy something with the same label in Britain or America, it doesn't. Because they know that A, it's not scalable with those appellations, but B, the people in America and Britain do not need the appellation. They're actually happy by the wine. So I think that level of understanding is hugely important. I think that what you've been doing with kegs is hugely important. I think there are a number of other people. I think in Italy, I've got a huge amount of time for the fact that the Antonoris and the Frescobaldis of this world have gone out and actually ancient families, essentially, but they're all over the country. So they've moved out of their own homelands. Then I'm going to be more controversial, and there's a guy called Felix Solis, and I can hear the hate coming in my direction from various wine people. He's made a wine called Mucho Mas, much more. It's also called The Governor for an exclusive British brand. And it's a wine that actually a lot of Americans would understand, more probably than Brits. It has a huge amount of sugar in there. It's got 17, 18 grams of sugar in a red wine. It doesn't taste sweet to the people buying it. It's true of a number of US wines at the moment. Meiomi is the model I could think of. I don't want to drink Meiomi. I think Meiomi Pinot Noir is a travesty of Pinot Noir. But it is giving a lot of pleasure to a lot of people who are drinking that wine. And the same applies to Steve Ribbley with his fruit-flavored wines there, Sala Rosa. I think that we need, and the XXL, and again, God, the thunderclaps are going to go against me mentioning XXL, because this is disgusting. 16% flavored, fruit-flavored wine. You know, I'm sure Randall Graham, if he's there, is thinking, Robert, don't do this. We'll talk about Randall in a second. But to be honest, 4 million, you know, they're selling a lot of bottles of stuff that are made from grapes that would otherwise be uprooted.
Right.
And the other side of the coin is Randall, who, you know, somewhere there will be a statue to Randall because, you know, he's just a wonderful academic who's got his publishing vineyard, or his new varieties, trying different things. But Randall is working with Gallo.
Right.
Same as Sam Petrosky is working with Gallo. So I think we've got to break down these barriers of the big bad people and the noble little people. We need to actually we all need each other. Dave Finney with The Prisoner, not my style of wine, never has been. The Orange Swifts are not my style of wine. But he is giving a lot of pleasure to a lot of people. And I used to be very negative about a lot of the natural wines I tasted because I thought they really were disgusting very often. But I missed the point. I missed how important those wines were, even at their disgustingest. How important they were of turning a lot of beer drinkers who were drinking some pretty funky tasting beers onto wine. They didn't want to learn about wine in the traditional ways, and they got into these funny wines with their funny labels and so on. Some of them have stayed there, some of them dropped out of wine, some of them gone on. But we need a broad church. So putting wine into bourbon barrels is not something I want to do, but I do not mind other people doing it.
Right. I think that is a lovely note to end on, because I mean, it really is that wine needs to be this big tent in order to continue to grow and to attract new people. And I agree, a lot of those wines are not to my taste either. But I think we all need to be cognizant of the fact that that is where a lot of the growth is coming. It is not from new people wanting to get in and buy Grand Cru Burgundies. So
I can just say one thing at the end, just very short time, but I just want to make one plea, because there's a lot of talk at the moment about tasting rooms in California and the prices and the cost of tasting rooms. And I realize that I'm old enough to remember before people charged for tasting rooms. We need the difference between perfume and wine. This came up the other day online. Perfume, nobody expects you to drop $30, $40, $50 for a bottle of perfume without smelling it. You may have been introduced to it by Instagram or TikTok or whatever, but you will go to a department store or a duty-free place and you will smell it. And maybe you'll smell it with your girlfriend or your boyfriend, whoever you're with, and you'll decide whether it suits you. We in wine don't do that. There are lots of legal reasons and other reasons and so on, but we expect people to drop $30, $40, $50 on a bottle of liquid that they have never tasted. And not only that, whether they like it or not, there's also the person or people they're going to drink it with. Right. And they don't know if they like it. We need to do much more sampling. Whether we're going to do it through taste test tubes, whether we're going to do it through events, how we're going to do it is a big question. But I think we need to get more people to be tasting more wines at no or little risk to themselves. And that is, to me, one of the strongest things that we can do to reignite the wine thing. Because the thing about spirits that everyone kind of overlooks, at the moment, I go into a bar in the States, a glass of Chardonnay is $15. A cocktail is $15. The Chardonnay, they just get the bottle, glug, glug, glug. It may have been opened yesterday, it may not, it may be nice, it may not. Cocktail, A, I know what I'm going to get, and B, this person does stuff. And they even say to me, what kind of, do you want shake instead, whatever, and they give it to me. That's exciting, that's fun. And we need to really get back into that level of thinking about fun and wine. It's not stories, it's not purpose, it's fun. And that's where I think the good somms, not bad somms, the good somms are doing that. But let's have more wine flights. Let's have more events. Let's just get, and not your Petit Manseng, because I entirely understand it, but Petit Manseng down the road from where I am in France, I love it as a grape. Yeah. I would love the people who are making Petit Manseng in France to be giving people a chance to discover Petit Français. And then say, oh, yeah, I like this. I like this more than the Chardonnay or the other stuff I was having. And that, to me, is kind of the future of wine.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, thank you, Robert Joseph. I so appreciate you taking the time to share all of those insights. And how, if people want to follow you or keep up on your projects, I know you have a new book coming out that we didn't even talk about.
It's called Wine Thinking. Basically, you can find me. LinkedIn is where I do a lot these days, Robert E. Joseph. You can find me on Instagram as Wine Thinker. And there's a Substack, which is called Wine Thinking. So if you go looking for me, you'll find me. If you look on Google, you'll find there's an American politician with the same name, and I'm not him. And somewhere else, there is somebody who designs men's underwear, and I'm not him either. So, but basically, I'm out there just like you. Neither of us is that hard to find these days. But what I do love, and you know this, anybody does follow me I used to do a lot on Twitter for various reasons, like other people. I don't do that now, but I love getting involved in conversations. And although I have pretty strong opinions, I don't always know I'm right. I want other people to actually say, yeah, but, and then, basically the conversation is two-sided.
And that was the thing that Twitter used to be good at.
Yeah.
With social media network where you did have conversations, and that's gone forward with the changes that have happened. But I do want to give definitely an endorsement to following you on LinkedIn. I think you are one of the best LinkedIn follows that I have. So thank you for your...
Well, thank you, Jason. And I'm looking forward to seeing you out that way, I hope in a few months, but wishing you all the best for the harvest before that. And hopefully we can get together over some Georgian, French, and wonderful California wine, and maybe some wines from the Rhone as well. So thanks a lot.
I look forward to it. Thank you very much. Thank you who joined us.
Take care. Thank you.
I will see you in a couple of weeks. Cheers, Robert.
Soon. Thanks.